Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 20, which was released in May 1995, and as always discussing the future of interactive entertainment. And for the second time we have Heart of Darkness on the cover, a game you might not remember, but at the time it received a lot of hype. It was made by all kinds of all-stars within the French video game scene. Among others, the person who made Out of This World, also known as Another World. So let's look inside, see what about this game, even though it's featured for the second time. So the opening column is you see Wipeout for the first time. It's a bit of a glare. Here we go. And this article is about, I believe it was about how developers had to keep keeping up with the latest technology. So we have the all-famous PlayStation disc, and there will be an article about European developers. Hey, it's Nolan Bushnell, the one who kickstarted the commercial phase of video game entertainment. Okay, so get used to this. Every month there will be something about the M2, Trip Hawkins' next idea. Apparently the 3DO wasn't powerful enough, so on to the M2, which would have these specs. Can it be sharp, please? There we go. And it was never released, even though it got pretty far into development. But the PlayStation was just too powerful. We have here the Nintendo 64 getting a preview. And why are they saying a chink in the armor? It has to do with Nintendo being still rather vague about what the machine exactly will do. What has been distributed are these Onyx workstations so people can make games. But it turns out that the games Cruising USA and Killer Instinct didn't really use the kind of hardware that the Nintendo 64 would use. So yeah, it had really nothing to do with Nintendo's future console. And the use of cartridge turned out to be a problem because the first couple cartridges, because of their price, were only allowed to be 100 megabits, which was very small actually, considering the amount of color and other details that games were supposed to have. So that was kind of weird. And again, it was delayed. Here we see the specs that were to be expected. So it's a 64-bit bus, but still use a 32-bit RISC chip. Nevertheless, it's more about the speed, and it's 105 megahertz. I think the final run would have 94 or something. So that still looked good at the time, but at the end of 1996, that wasn't that special anymore, really. So the DVD, I didn't know about this, but apparently there was a Sony/Philips equivalent and a Toshiba version, which would have been cheaper, but still, I believe that the Sony version won. And but yeah, DVD was going to be very big, replacing the CD and replacing the VHS for movies. So Edge gives a glimpse into that. NEC makes some kind of RAM chip. I don't know what this 3D hotshot is. Render Morphex. Oh. And Pioneer is making Mac computers. Yeah, the Jaguar CD is about to be released, but I don't remember any software being added to the game that was interesting. Here again are some specs. So there you go. What are the coin-op games of mid-1995? Well, Sega Rally is being shown. Football. There's talk about Street Fighter Alpha, but I couldn't find any images. There's Darkstalkers we see here. So 2D fighting games still popular, at least in Japan. And Air Combat 2D22 must be released. I've never seen that in real life. And the question is, will PowerPC be used for Model 3, which would eventually be used for Virtua Fighter 3? So, oh, I love this game, Alpine Racer. Yeah, that racer. They really gave me the feeling that I was skiing. That was pretty good. So, the Saturn getting peripherals, like the steering wheel, fighting stick, which wasn't that good, multi-tap mouse, and will soon be released in Britain, together with some games. Oh, here's some Japanese games being released, like Panzer Dragoon. Okay, so there's a review of a book that describes the history of Apple. And nothing really special in this book. Might as well go on to Wikipedia and read about it. So the letter section. Was there anything interesting? Talk about the Pippin. Oh, this is an interesting letter about how people are concerned that if people are not programming their own games like they did with the ZX Spectrum, will we be losing talent in the long run? Well, luckily programming games has become easier, so that kind of helps. Somebody being nostalgic about fantastic games like Stunt Car Racer not being made. Some disappointment in the PlayStation. Yeah, talk about how important it should be for Nintendo to use CDs, which are cheap. Okay, so we have a preview for Astal, a very pretty looking 2D shooter game for the Saturn. I mean, look at these images, so colorful. And was I able to find a review for this online? I don't remember if it was that good, to be honest. I'm sorry, this is not a shooting game, this is a platforming game. What was I thinking? So I recall the reviews being kind of like Clockwork Knight. Not that interesting quad gameplay, but it looked great. And Virtual Highlight was also a pretty mediocre role-playing game. It was third person, though. So that was kind of cool. This character is a sprite, which is kind of funny to look at. But yeah, so there was a role-playing game for the Saturn early on, which was 3D. Deadless, another mediocre game, really being released for the Saturn. This time a first-person shooter. So look at the images. So 3 games in a row for the Saturn, which would have pretty graphics, but add nothing to the genres they represented. Fatal Fury 3 for the Neo Geo, which had less fighters than the previous Fatal Fury, namely Special, but it looked fantastic. They redid all the sprites. And I've never played it, so I can't say much about the game. Immercenary. This is a very odd game. It was kind of like a shooter, but with levels where you have to gain points or something. I've never played it, but I had to read about it. And yeah, it was 3D, and didn't get very good reviews, so that's why people have forgotten it. But apparently every level you have to be number 1 or something, so it was kind of like a deathmatch, I think. So, Extreme Power. I couldn't find this game online under this name, but I think it had another name, and it was a mech shooting game. No reviews, but I did find some filmage on it on YouTube, and it looks rather bland. You could jump, though. That was pretty cool. So, it was a jumping shooting game, but very barren levels. Not much to do. Another shooting game, this time for the 3DO, and again rather lackluster. According to other reviews, it had bland levels, kind of like Alien vs. Predator. So that was supposed to be the Doom equivalent for the 3DO, but it didn't pan out that way. And on to today's main feature. Hold on a sec. Heart of Darkness. Yeah, that's the name would be called. And we see fantastic full motion video stills. And this game had a lot of animation. You can't see that in the pictures, of course. But just like Another World, everything moves fantastically. Kind of like Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey. That's what the kind of game was. Very hard. Death was lurking everywhere. But it looked fantastic. Oddworld, though, had a much more interesting premise. This game was just your standard fantasy nightmare. But important people were making the game. Let's look at the credits here. Maybe you'll recognize some of the names. I think these are also the people who made Little Big Adventure. I could be wrong, though. Sorry for the glare. I'm shooting this at work, and another week until the school year begins. So I'm just using this empty room, doing this in a break. Okay, so more talk about the PlayStation, because hey, you know, we have to talk about the PlayStation and what's going to happen. What's really cool is that there's a lot of discussion about the companies like Virgin and Ocean and Bullfrog who would be making games for the PlayStation, what that would be like. So you have the development system being discussed. I'll zoom into it a bit. Maybe you find that interesting. And how to author the game. So this was an article made for people really interested in making games for the PlayStation. So I think this was the workstation. And this was the debug PlayStation, so you would play your final product on this and see if it worked. I've seen one of these. This is the contents of the PlayStation. So here are all the chips. It worked. Here's an interview with Ken Kutaragi. And we all know him. He's still a big fish in the PlayStation world. And yeah, of course, he's very positive about this PlayStation so far. Toshindon's graphics, for example, he really likes. How hard they had to work. Making a joke about the last 2 weeks before it was released, they worked continuously and that there was no bath in the office space, so they all started to stink. So, yeah, all positive, and he would turn out to be right. Oh, he's also talking about the PlayStation 2 already. And he says that he wants higher performance and online capabilities for the PlayStation 2. Well, the first one definitely was the case. And yes, you could play online, but that wasn't used very well. Now, here's some talk about developers in Europe. The French, you might recognize some of these companies. And the Germans, no, still the French. Next page has the Germany, but here Germany has. So yeah, it's basically a guide to what at the time were all the companies in Europe. I don't see any Netherlands. Oh, here, Black Legend? No, that's Zagreb. See, I'm from the Netherlands, and I don't see any companies for me. Hold on, these are Belgian flags, but these must be German companies because Belgium doesn't have that many. I think this is a mistake. Maybe these are Belgian. And so we've made it to the review section, and then next time we'll continue with that.